Hello, welcome to another episode of Inspiring Young Men to Integrity. My name is Biniam, I'm your host. Today we're talking further on integrity as we always do, but we're honing in on a specific segment where I have started, I should say, a series on courage and integrity. Courage and integrity. Today we're digging it even further. Today the title of our conversation is going to go as follows. Vulnerability follows courage, the frontline battle of the most young men. Vulnerability follows courage. This past weekend, actually yesterday, I was out on the streets doing my man on the street interviews. I have a special playlist that I would encourage you to check out on my channel called Epic Interviews of Integrity or something along those lines. And it was very interesting, the themes that kept coming. One of the questions I'd be asking before the interview was over of those that I was chatting with was any advice that they would give to young men in regards to pursuing a life of integrity courageously. And one of the things that kept coming up over and over again, it was almost like a plea when I was hearing these various individuals that I was interviewing, this plea that said, young men, get comfortable with expressing emotion. Be open to expressing emotion. It was just a refrain that kept coming up over and over, and I saw this trend here and I said, we need to address this. We need to address this because this is something that is very familiar in the mindset of our culture at large currently, especially for you young men, this encouragement to express vulnerability. And so again, the title today we are talking about is Vulnerability Follows Courage. And it's a very interesting way of putting it. It almost seems like we're putting the cart before the horse when we say that vulnerability follows courage, because it almost seems like vulnerability stereotypically is seen in a certain way, and that's by way of weakness. My encouragement to you today as a result of this conversation is to challenge you to be willing to show and express vulnerability in your life. Let's see if I can make this case succinctly and helpfully enough for you. But young men, let me just start off by saying it's so important to understand that vulnerability and courage are not opposing they're not opposing forces. Vulnerability actually really leans heavily on courage. In fact, that's why I'm saying again, vulnerability follows courage. Society has culturally discouraged young men from expressing vulnerability, just because we've been brought, right, young men, to see vulnerability as weakness. And so as a result, we are to avoid it at all costs. Expressing vulnerability, however, is a tremendous, powerful sign of what true courage looks like. But let me just start off with some key definitions, and then we'll dive even deeper into this conversation. Courage is the ability, as we said in our last conversation, to confront great difficulties in spite of the fear that comes with it. Courage does not necessarily point to the absence of fear in those who don't have any fear and they can just courageously accomplish whatever. Courage is the ability to face difficulties and trials in our lives, especially when there's fear. Most of us, it's a natural thing. When you're facing something unfamiliar, you're facing something uncertain, there are those internal responses that say, yikes, this is kind of scary, this is really daunting, this is overwhelming. These are normal responses. Courage is being able to still, in spite of these debilitating feelings internally, to still push ourselves through those trying circumstances that we find ourselves in. Vulnerability is the willingness to show one's weakness, especially when there is a perception or an expectation that you're going to face possible criticism or rejection. Vulnerability, again, is the willingness to show one's weaknesses and to be open to doing so despite the possible criticisms and perhaps even rejections that may follow. That's what vulnerability is. The very heart of it, what makes vulnerability is difficult is that last component, that possibility that you're going to be rejected, that you're going to be criticized because of the things that you're expressing that are very like, it makes you, I use the language of sacred, like these things that are so deep within us that we want to protect. I use the language of this is really sacred stuff that we're dealing with, and we want to be very careful who we share that with. And many in our cultural setting have learned how to express vulnerability and to do so judiciously. There are some who do not do it very well, some who express vulnerabilities in spaces that they ought not to be. This is probably where you see evidences where an individual might overshare or give a little too much about themselves in a way that comes back and harms them, and it's really unhelpful. But vulnerability is this willingness to show one's weakness and be open in spite of the possibility that there may be rejection or criticism. I want to talk about how one can express vulnerability in a way that is judicious and tactful and wise, because we shouldn't just go and open ourselves up to anyone without distinction and without careful consideration. And of course, we are talking about integrity that undergirds this whole conversation. In fact, this whole platform is just undergirded by this idea of what integrity looks like, especially for young men. For us young men to walk in integrity, to commit ourselves to a life of pursuing and following integrity, and dare I say, to even desire pursuing it in a consistent way. This is also important. So the running helpful analogy, or not analogy, but definition of integrity that I have found supremely helpful is integrity is the consistent desire for one's internal values to match their external actions while they're true to themselves and respectful to others. And I found that really helpful. Now, it's sad that so many men are discouraged from exhibiting or expressing vulnerability because for many decades it has been seen as weakness. Societal expectations have men presenting themselves as tough, as stoic, as unemotional. This is the kind of way that we're groomed to grow as men, and this is what's celebrated. What is not celebrated, what is actually ridiculed, and what is highly criticized for men is when they are showing signs of weakness. I remember listening to a fantastic book by Brene Brown, and she mentioned, she's a social worker who has written some fantastic resources that have been helpful for so many, but she was talking about this one book signing event that she was at, and while she was at this book signing, she just given a talk, and she was signing various attendees' books, and this man was standing in line. He came up to her and he said, a lot of the things you're talking about as far as vulnerability are concerned, it sounds amazing, but it seems somewhat convenient that you're speaking primarily to women and don't have much to say to us men. And he proceeded to share his experience where he said, when I try to express vulnerability to my family, his wife and his girls, he said he feels the crap beaten out of him because that's not what they signed on for him in his role as a man in their lives. That was a sign of weakness that they didn't have any space for it. So he was struggling personally to say, how do us men express vulnerability while we're facing this societal pressure, societal expectation that we as men should be tough, that we as men should be unemotional, that we should be stoic, that we should be unfeeling, that we should be so rigid, like there's nothing that can faze or hurt us because we're that strong. That's what strength and courage for men looks like. It was an interesting perspective. Therefore, it is, well, when we suppress our emotions this way, when we keep it bottled down, there are some significant detriments to our mental health. And further, it stunts us socially. Now imagine the years compounded that we keep practicing this cultural expectation for us to be unfeeling, for us to be unemotional, for us to be stoic, for us to be tough. Like the more we practice this, the more we suppress those emotions that are there. It's not like we don't have them. We definitely have them. We just are not permitted to express them. So over time, as we practice this, it sort of sinks in this is inappropriate, we can't respond this way by way of expressing our emotions and expressing weakness, that we have to hold the fort down, and then we neglect these parts of ourselves at the core that are desperately longing to be expressed. These are healthy things for us to be expressing, and yet they're cut off from us. We're not allowed to go into this space here. Whereas others can, we're not permitted to. And as a result, we start to harm ourselves. We start to bring some significant breakdowns in our lives. It's I think a huge contributor for so many men who suffer from their mental health, because they've just not been given the permission, nor have they been encouraged to express themselves in healthy, appropriate ways emotionally. This is a critical part. These are feelings that all human beings across the board have. These feelings that are wide-ranging from happiness to extreme sadness to worry to fear to anxiousness, like so many expressions that are legitimate, and that we ought to be practicing appropriate ways of expressing them, because when we don't, we suppress ourselves in ways that aren't doing us any benefit. Therefore, it's critical for us to break away from this societal expectation and to especially celebrate and encourage men to embrace vulnerability as a valuable trait for themselves. Expressing vulnerability to your young man is not a sign of weakness, but rather it's a powerful manifestation of courage. It takes immense strength. Listen carefully, young man. It takes immense strength to be courageous in expressing your vulnerability. To reveal emotions and to be truthful with yourself and with those around you, that takes tremendous courage and energy as well too. It takes tremendous energy by way of you doing the work and understanding who you are and what it is you're feeling and what's the internal state where you're currently at. So many of us young men, if I were to ask so many of you, hey, give me a quick check-in. How are you feeling at this moment in time right now? What's going on internally for you emotionally? So many of us would not know how to answer that question because we've never practiced. We've never gotten in touch with, I don't know, like, how am I feeling right now? What's going on internally? Like, we just don't know. I might as well be speaking a different language. One of the things that has really been helpful for me in my 12-step program that I'm a part of, one of the ways we start our meetings regularly is we do a feelings check-in. We just basically go around the room and everyone has a couple of moments to say, hey, I'm so-and-so, and here's my feelings check-in. I'm feeling X, Y, and Z today, and it's been beautiful because the more we practice this, the more we learn to be in touch with what's going on internally for us, what's going on underneath the hood. Imagine, young man, a lot of you might resonate with this example. Imagine that you're driving a vehicle and all of a sudden you start hearing some funny sounds and thuds underneath the hood. One, you could have the option of ignoring it and just keeping on going and saying, maybe it'll go away. Two, you could open up the hood and check underneath the hood and say, what's going on here? And you might try to do some troubleshooting and finding out what is the source of the problem, and then how do you fix the problem? So many of us are in that first category where we say, oh, something's thumping under the hood, I'm going to ignore it. Versus doing the right thing and saying, hey, how do I get to know what's going on underneath here? That takes massive strength to be vulnerable. It takes immense courage, young man, to get in touch with yourself and to know for yourself first and foremost what's going on. How are you feeling? What's going on emotionally under the hood of your body? And then even an extension of that courage to be able to express that to those that you're in community with. That's something that most of us don't have access to. Being vulnerable displays trust and willingness to take the risks and have deep soul connections that we all so longingly are desperate for. Do you know that most of us in society, even though we might be in the midst of friends, even though we might be in the midst of amazing times with others at the bar or amongst our chums of long-term friends, we're like in the midst of laughing and good times and whatever, and yet we still feel alone and we still feel empty. We still feel like no one really knows who we are. I've seen this over and over, and I mean, I live in this neighborhood just in the downtown part of Calgary here. I love taking walks down the street, listening to all the amazing laughter and good times people are having on the patios as they are, catching up with friends and enjoying great food and drinks and walks and all these beautiful things. And yet, my question as I watch all this is, I wonder how many of these individuals are still going back home and feeling that deep sense of loneliness. You see, vulnerability opens up access for us to take the opportunity to practice trust with others and to establish and develop some deep soul connections where others can know you deeply in a way that your soul craves. It creates this climate of honesty and authenticity that leads to your personal growth. These are some magnificent things that happen when we take the courageous step of embracing vulnerability. I'm about to get into the real rubber meets the road of how vulnerability really takes courage. You might not be convinced quite yet, but we're about to move into the section of, if this is resonating and you're thinking, okay, maybe I want to try this, maybe I want to walk into this. By the way, I'm not sure why my nose is like really itchy, but it's a part of me just keeping on scratching my nose. But nonetheless, to start practicing vulnerability, what does this look like? I think I would be remiss if I just said, man, you need to go practice vulnerability. Now go do it. And you'd be like, where do I start? How does this work? I don't even know what to start thinking about. Here are some helpful suggestions. For those of you who are thinking, I don't know what it looks like to walk with this experience in vulnerability. I resonate with how I've been brought up in being strong and macho and stoic and unfeeling and all these other things that I've been brought up with, and I just don't know how to start even feeling, but I'm like, where do I start? Here are some helpful steps. Number one, first step is this. Acknowledge you have emotions. Acknowledge that deep within you there are things that need to be expressed. Acknowledge that there's things that you have been suppressing and you've gotten really good at suppressing them that you may not even know that they're there. Acknowledge that you as a fellow human being, part of your makeup is made on this premise that you have emotional settings underneath the radar. Underneath your hood, if you had the engine of your body, you have emotions that are making up the framework of who you are. And in acknowledging that you have emotions, that you're going to start applying yourself to start being attentive to saying, okay, what are the emotions that are coming up? What are the things I'm starting to feel that I can at least start taking an awareness of? That's a really helpful starting point. Is, first of all, just acknowledge that there's emotions there. Now, for some of us, we may have a very specific set of emotions that we are really good at expressing. For some, it may be anger. When you get angry, you'll definitely let loose on that one because that's an appropriate thing that shows what masculinity looks like, right? For others, it might be a feeling of being misunderstood. You feel misunderstood, that people just don't get you, and that you're misinterpreted, and that could be one of those. There are some things that you may know what it feels like to be happy. You're like, hey, great, things are working well for me today. This is a good thing. I'm happy about that. What you may not have practice in expressing feelings are those that make one feel vulnerable. For example, what's it like when you get scared? You're not allowed to be scared as men, are we? We're not allowed to be scared because we're supposed to be tough and strong and like courageous and standing in the face of opposition without any fear on the radar. But what does it look like for us to feel fear or to feel uncertainty? I don't know what's going to happen. This is kind of, this is like a vulnerable feeling there. It's this point, these moments that give you that opportunity to start walking into that acknowledgement that, there's that feeling. This is uncomfortable, but I'm still going to acknowledge its existence there. I'm going to not only acknowledge it, but I'm also going to accept it. I'll acknowledge it and say, I see it right there. There it is. And I'm gonna make space to accept this without stifling it down again and saying, I can't go there, this is so uncomfortable. And no, it's acknowledging and then accepting. It's allowing yourself, dear young men, to feel, and then beyond feeling, to start expressing those emotions. You're already expressing emotions, the ones that you feel comfortable with. I'm talking about the full range of emotions, especially those ones that you don't want to express because you've been taught not to express them, because doing so would make you feel less than a man. I'm talking about those emotions where you're like uncomfortable expressing them, but it's like still a part of your framework and you need to actually walk into it. Allow yourself to feel and then to express those emotions. Even if, no, let's rephrase that. Especially if they make you feel uncomfortable and vulnerable. Those are the very ones that you need to be walking into and making space for and acknowledging and accepting. Oh, here's this emotion here. I was at a dance last night down in the downtown core with some friends, and I met some new friends while I was there. And while we were dancing, I went outside just for some fresh air, and I was chatting with a couple of them. And the one's partner, he had left her down on the dance floor, but he had forgotten to mention that he was leaving outside. And these new friends, they were brand new. They're from a different country, but they were brand new here. They'd only been here a few days, and so he'd come up outside for a bit of fresh air. And when his partner came up, maybe about a half hour later, she was distraught. She was so worried. She felt abandoned. She felt like she was almost panicking. And when she saw him outside, she just kind of fell apart, saying, "Why did you leave me?" And I could see that there was something brewing here, so I sort of intervened to help mediate between the two of them and asked him for permission, saying, "Hey, do you mind if I just take her to the side and just kind of comfort her and encourage her," because he was having a bit of struggle doing so. And he said, "Yeah, I trust you, brother." So I took her aside, and I mean, she was in tears, she was distraught, and she was really, trying to calm down, but it's taking some time for the adrenaline to sort of simmer. And as I sort of calmed her down, she kept saying something, and this is a female, by the way. So it's not only just men, but it's also women, but she kept saying things like, I feel so awkward crying, I should be crying. And I said, "But why? This is an appropriate response. You had a response, an emotional response. Let's make space for this, and let's not apologize for the way we're feeling, but let's give this some space to express itself, because it's better coming out this way, because this is natural and helpful and healthy." And so even for her, excuse me, it was really important to hear that feedback. And so, especially during the discomfort of some feelings that come across for all of us, but especially to you young men, I'm encouraging you to step into it and acknowledge it and to accept it, to allow yourself to feel it. Do you see why this is going to take some courage now? Why vulnerability really follows courage? Because first of all, you have to be courageous enough to face these very uncertain emotions. You're not sure what it's going to take you, but they're desperately calling for expression. This is why I say vulnerability follows courage. It's important as well, further, not only to acknowledge and to accept and to feel into these emotions that you're feeling, but it's also really important to identify and name these emotions. I'm feeling sad. This is really, really sad for me, and I don't like it, but I'm feeling this, for example. Or I'm feeling really angry, and like this is really, or I'm feeling really afraid right now, and I don't know what to do. I'm feeling very uncertain. Like when you start giving names to these feelings, that's part of that. You're starting to identify them and to give them specific names. And for many of you, you just may not even have access to what are my options here. There are resources online. One of the ones I'd just briefly encourage you to check out is this one called the feelings wheel. So just Google the feelings wheel, print yourself a copy, have that on hand, fold that piece of paper up. But when you're feeling something and you just don't know what it is, like open that up and it will give you like this wheel that has all these really fantastic, specific emotions. And you can go through them saying, no, not that. This is closer. No, it's not that. Oh, here it is. This is the exact word that I need to be able to put a name to this. And that's a really helpful thing to expand your vocabulary and to expand your awareness of what makes you you, especially as you're trying to figure out, this is where I'm at right now. That's a really helpful resource. So the feelings wheel, check that out, print it for yourself, get familiar, because that's what's really going to help you get far more fine-tuned to what's going on under the hood of your emotional states. And then this is where it gets even tougher. Friends, I would give you the easy way if I knew it, but in my experience, in these 40 plus years of my life, the best advice that I love to give rarely has shortcuts in it. Rarely has shortcuts, and that's why I'm giving you this intel, because this is what I wish I had when I was young too. But not only are you to acknowledge and accept your emotions and feel into them and name them specifically, but then share these emotions with someone that you trust. Don't share with anyone. Don't do what I do, like going on the internet saying, blah, this is it, I see so many of my friends, for example, who are going through some really deep emotions, and because they struggle with how to express them, they'll go and just post widely to everyone and what's going on, and my heart goes out to them. But that's what I would discourage, my dear young man. Don't do that, but find someone who you trust, someone who's safe in your life, someone who you can say, okay, I feel safe when I'm with this person, and then start practicing them. Ask them first and foremost, saying, hey, I'm practicing how to get in touch with my emotional side, and I want to practice vulnerability. Is it okay if I practice with you? Would you let me sort of practice this with you so that I can get to be a little bit better version of me? This is how I'm struggling on my way forward, but would you be with that person for me? So this is even getting a little scary, because now you're going to have to talk to someone about what's going on inside, especially those sacred things that are going on, those things that you want to guard and protect about yourself. And now I'm encouraging you to express that vulnerability to someone else that you trust and you feel safe by. This is so critical and so important for you, man. So important. And that's why I'm saying, if there's any shortcut, I would happily share that with you, but this is the best pathway to follow for you to get to be a much better version of you. And as you gradually build confidence in practicing this for yourself and in practicing this with that safe person, as you gradually build confidence, you start seeing the evidence of courage increasing internally as you walk into this space of vulnerability. And you start understanding a lot better why vulnerability really does follow courage. Because first and foremost, it takes some tremendous guts to be able to do all of these things that I've been encouraging you to practice doing for yourself. So once again, just to review, acknowledge your feelings. 1, acknowledge them. And then 2, accept them. And then 3, feel into them. 4, give specific names. Use resources like the feelings wheel, for example. Number 5, share these emotions with someone who you feel safe with. And then continue to grow in that aspect. Some other ways that you could express vulnerability. Listen carefully, young man. I'm just going to rifle through these just for the sake of time. Admit your mistakes. We struggle so much in admitting our mistakes. We don't even want to acknowledge that we make mistakes, but admit your mistakes. Just say, hey, I don't know how to do this. I botched this. Ask for help. Again, young men, how many of you guys, like I once did, struggle asking for help and expressing helplessness? Be honest about your thoughts and your feelings. My goodness, that's a scary one there, isn't it? That's it's such a tough one. My dear friends, vulnerability follows courage, because you first need courage to practice vulnerability. Vulnerability follows courage because you first need courage to express vulnerability. Does that make sense? I hope it does. The act of bravery precedes vulnerability because we confront our fears and embrace our true selves. Do you know how scary that is for so many people to look at themselves as they currently are? Because they haven't done that for years, and they know it's kind of a mess internally here, and it's a scary thing to see where they've come, and they just don't know how to deal with it. They don't have the skills to actually deal with it. It takes tremendous courage to look at oneself in a true, honest way. to face your fears. My challenge to you young men is this: step up. Step up and be courageous by embracing opportunities for vulnerability, opening up emotionally, and living with integrity. This is my desire for you young men. As I was saying in the beginning, I was hearing so many refrains from the people I was interviewing over the weekend here, and they just kept on saying, young men. Oh, how we would love to see them expressing vulnerability. This is significant of a huge gap where we're perhaps presently at in the perception of culture at large. If this is resonating with you young men, I would love to hear from you. Drop me a line in the comments below saying, hey, I'm feeling the struggle here. I would love to understand more of what this looks like. Drop me your questions and let's see if I can't even make another presentation, another conversation based on something that you're asking perhaps. If you haven't already done so, I'd love for you to subscribe, because I am actively building a community of those who are inspired by integrity, especially young men. I would like to make that community specifically for you, so that we can shock a world by expectations like they never had, that we could be men of integrity, and that we could basically live a life that is worth living. Thank you for listening and being a part of this conversation. Like I say, I'd love to connect with you. I hope to see you in the next video. Until then, I will look forward to more on this journey that we're on together. Bye for now.